Good afternoon. We have another webinar in our series on the fundamentals of finance. Just checking to see how the sound is coming through. Yeah, loud and clear, which is good. There we go. Okay. Forgive me, there were some technical dramas before I got onto the call. My other video has decided not to work, other camera, but never mind, we will persevere through these very, very minor difficulties. I'll hop straight into our presentation today. Today is, we're going through a case study, Lysa and Hermia. It's a bit of a capstone of the stuff that we've covered so far in the series around the fundamentals of finance. We've covered a lot of ground. We've covered a lot of the basics that I like to see people have in their financial position. And I thought it would be a good idea to bring that all together and demonstrate the ways, what that actually looks like in reality and what that can mean for people that are working towards a particular objective. And our last scenario was very much around people that are mid-career, really starting to hit their straps, starting to build a bit of, equity in their career and equity in their financial arrangements. I thought we'd do things a little bit differently this time and talk about Lysa and Hermia, who are a younger couple starting out with a very clear goal of buying a house, and just cover off what some of the fundamentals that we've talked about could mean for them. The idea as well is to illustrate the benefits of getting this kind of thing in place early, to show you the benefit early on. And I promise I will include the word intentionality at some stage as well, as has been the norm so far. So the usual disclaimer, we are recording this, obviously. There's not a lot of, I don't know if there's anybody on this particular recording, but I should flag for people watching on YouTube, the disclaimer is pretty important. It is very much, do not do anything based on what we're talking about. Seek personal financial advice. I don't know your circumstances. What I'm saying may be entirely inappropriate for what you're looking to do. But we'll start with the big Australian dream, that idea of buying your own home. Now, I am fortunate enough to be working together with the group of Loan Gallery, who, for many of you, will recognise the name. They are who your broker works with. And a lot of their focus has been, over the years that I've known Steve and the team here, has been helping people get into their first home. So doing a lot of work around, the disciplines that are required to build up that deposit, but also what are the government schemes and incentives that are out there to help you leverage your way into that Australian property market. So let's get to know Lysa and Hermia, who are on that same track. Now, Lysa is 27 and Hermia is 28. And yes, they are relatively unusual names. They are from a particular source. So I look forward to hearing from anybody who works out where I'm getting these names from. They live with Lysa's parents. So they moved in together a little while ago. They're living in there. It is a one-bathroom house, which is driving some of their motivation. They are relatively early on in their careers. They studied for a good part of their 20s. Lysa earns $60,000 plus super, while Hermia is earning $50,000 plus super. They each have a credit card with $5,000 owing, and Hermia is 3 years into a 7-year car loan that still has about $8,000 outstanding on it. Fundamentally, primarily, overwhelmingly, is to get into their own house, or more specifically, get a house with their own bathroom. There are only so many instances of bumping into your in-laws or your parents around bathroom time before you start to think, well, this needs to stop. I need to get out into my own place. So Lysa and Hermia are very much focused on that and very determined to get into their own place and take charge of their future. Their goal, more specifically, is to buy a house for $600,000. They would love to buy a more expensive house, but they understand that they are starting out and they just want their first home to be something that's affordable. Now, $600,000 is a relevant figure for people looking at government incentives, particularly in Victoria. There are some stamp duty thresholds and incentives associated with that number in regional areas. My discussion today is going to completely ignore government tax incentives and stamp duty incentives. For more information in that area, have a chat to your broker. The Loan Gallery team are more than happy to answer questions around that because that's beyond the scope of my presentation today, and also realistically, most of the advice that I give, I tend to handball that to the team at Loan Gallery. Their objective is to aim for a 20% deposit, so $120,000 plus costs, which leaves them with really a target of about $150,000 they want to save up so they can feel like they can afford to buy their house. Currently, they've managed to put together $30,000 in savings in a combined joint account. The combined net income between the two of them after tax is $93,316. So assume no tax planning, simply they earn their $60,000 and $50,000 and they are paying their gross tax rate. Now, another exclusion from this, I assume they don't have any HECS or HELP debt. For people that have been studying into their 20s, this is unlikely, but again, for the ease of this exercise, I have excluded them. Their living expenses at the moment are $6,500 per month, leaving $15,316 they can save per year. They have been saving for a little while. They have put any extra spare money or gifts towards that $30,000 they've saved so far. But one thing they are very conscious of is the fact that they are living a very nice lifestyle while living at home and saving perhaps less than they should be. Now, there are many justifications and reasons for living a little bit more bountifully when you're living at home with your parents. One of them is because you don't want to be there all the time, so you want to get out a little bit, and that involves spending money. So $6,500 is a number that to me leaps out. It's something that we would be looking to have a chat about. Now, the big reason we'd be looking to have that chat is because at that rate of savings, and if we assume that the Australian property market or the Melbourne property market, depending where you are, is growing at 6% a year, 20% of that will keep climbing, so it'll take them 175 months or 14 and a half years to reach their deposit target. That means that I think Lysa is 27, so she would be 41 and a half before they would be able to buy their first property, which leaves them feeling not terribly optimistic. So, an action plan, and I hope I get some good appreciation for my outstanding graphic skills there. What actions can they take to increase the likelihood of them getting into the property sooner? So how can we shorten that 14 and a half year timeline and make them feel a little bit more in control, a little bit more confident about the steps they're taking towards getting into their own bathroom? Now, there is a number of layers towards the approach they can use in this regard, hence the lasagna. Any one of the things I'm about to go through are beneficial and improves that trajectory and accelerates that speed towards their goal. But doing them all together compounds that and creates a rather more tasty approach like lasagna. I'm just forcing the metaphors the further we go along. So layer number one we would be recommending is reviewing the living expenses. And we've talked about this in our Budgeting Made Easy presentation a little while ago. Think about your expenses as a percentage of your income, right? It's not a perfect system, but it makes a very what can become a very complicated exercise, nice and blunt. Just try to think in those three ratios, that needs, wants, and worries. Now, what we can say with Lysa and Hermia is looking at their numbers, spending $6,500 per month is 84% of their net income, which leaves them saving only 16%. This is why they're not making as quick a progress on their savings target as they might have liked. If instead they looked at something like 50%, which is in line with our target ratio of 50, 30, 20, that means that their living budget would drop down to about $3,900 per month. Quite a sharp drop. And I think this entire presentation is predicated on the idea that Lysa and Hermia are comfortable and willing to make the sacrifices they want to be making in order to achieve their financial goals. This is not a matter of having your cake and eating it too. They will have to make some choices and some priorities. So reviewing the living expenses is probably the first place we would ask them to start. It can start with some pretty basic things. Review your expenses in the last 6 months, identify any line items that stand out to you or that maybe you can do without, and work to cancel them. The common ones that we always get to hear about are Netflix subscriptions and Foxtel, and they are pretty expensive. But when you're living at home and you're trying to save money, are they going to make the biggest difference? Not really. Is having that so you can sit at home and watch TV and have a cheap evening a worthwhile expense across a month? I reckon it probably is. So try to find other living expenses. Have your insurances reviewed. So there is a theory in my kind of side of the fence, the financial advice world. Somebody, I can't remember quite who, but they were suggesting that people should take one annual leave day a year and spend that day reviewing all of their expenses, their utilities, their insurances, their ongoing costs. Do that together in the morning and then take the rest of the day off and enjoy yourself. Because it's not easy. You have to spend a lot of time on hold and chasing down other details. But I would, strongly recommend finding the time to review your living expenses. Now, some of that may also involve kind of your discretionary expenditure. You may look at your discretionary expenditure over the last 6 months and say, yep, this is maybe a little excessive, or maybe pruning back on that is going to get me into that house faster. And this is where we're talking about my favorite word, intentionality. When you're weighing up these different considerations, having a fun life now, enjoying yourself versus, putting money aside, trying to build for that future that you're working towards, which is more important? Which is the bigger priority? And that's going to help you make those choices because, as I say, all of these choices will require some level of sacrifice. Uh, and there are people who can buy a house without doing so, but in my experience, the people that really work towards it tend to get a bit more out of it. So again, returning to that ratio, 50, 30, 20, needs of 50%, that's kind of where you're sitting at. There is an argument that if you're living at home, potentially you can reduce that. So treat living at home, maybe mum and dad are asking bored, maybe they're not. Regardless, even if they are, work out what a reasonable weekly rent you'd be paying is, and that can form part of your savings. So if you're living in a nice house and et cetera, if you were to move out on your own and rent would be $600 a week or $500 a week, subtract from that the board your parents might be charging you. Say they're charging you $300 a week. Divert the difference into a savings account because that way at least you're putting some money aside for it. But then you've got 30% of your budget should go towards discretionary expenses. Now remember, they're making about $94,000 a year. So 30% of that is about $31 and a bit thousand dollars. Yeah, you're still looking at $2,500 to $2,800 a month of discretionary expenses. And finally, the 20% is kind of that minimum savings ratio I like to see people having, which we dedicate towards that worries category. Now, in reality, across that ratio, across that 100%, we need to be looking at how can we maximize the savings percentage. So taking that 20% and increasing it to 25, 30, possibly even 40%. Now, that is not going to be easy once again, and I recognize that not everybody can do that, but it does involve making choices and making a priority list. So working out what's the most important aspect to you. I'm just trying to stay on track with it. So we looked at the different savings ratios for Lysa and Hermia as well. So currently they're saving about 16%. They're spending $6,500 a month, and it's going to take them 14.6 years to get where they're going. I just saw the typo. You can ignore that top right-hand cell that says negative 4.9. Yes. Yes, all those numbers in the right-hand cell, right-hand column should be moving down one. But so if they were able to increase their savings ratio to a fixed 20%, that means they're spending $6,300 per month. That's going to take them 9.7 years to accumulate the savings necessary. So we're talking about a very long time frame, which is why they can drop so drastically. But still, 9.7 years, that'd be 37, 38. It's probably too long for them to be living with their parents based on, their desire to get out. Bring that up to 25%, you're shaving another $400 off their monthly living expenses, brings it down to 6.8 years until the savings are built up. Now, inflation is something we've not talked a lot about. I've ignored it in this scenario except for here. So in this previous ratio, 16, 20, and 25%, I've assumed their salaries stay exactly the same, expenses stay exactly the same, and they're saving the exact same flat amount. But in reality, inflation is going to increase by around 3% a year. So their expenses will increase by that. Hopefully their salary increases by that as well. So what I've done is I've assumed that every 13 months or after every 12 months, they increase their savings rate by 3%. So that their entire salary increase, the portion that they're saving, they increase it by 3%. They are still getting 3% on the remaining 84, 80, 75%. So they're still increasing their salary there, but they're also increasing their savings. On the other side of it, good afternoon, thanks for joining. We also have a 25% plus inflation. That alone shaves another half a year off the tally to get there. That final column is getting very distracting. But when we start going towards 30% and even 40%, we start to see a really drastic change. So a 40% savings rate is pretty significant. These people, I would say, then are saving very hard to achieve their goal of buying their house. It means they're living or getting by on $4,600 per month instead of $6,500. So it's a reduction of about 30%. But it means that their deposit should be ready within about 3.5 years. Still quite a long period of time, but as a flat objective, going from 14.6 to 3.6 is a very sharp drop. And again, maybe some things can be done to try to broaden that. But I think if we can get them down to 3.6, that's not a bad outcome. Layer of the lasagna number 2 is the snowball side. So how do we start building their snowball? So looking at the debts they've currently got, Lysa and Hermia, we've chosen debts that are relatively consistent. They're relatively common. Some people will have more, some people will have less. But regardless, we have 2 credit cards of $5,000 each with a minimum repayment of $30 per month, charging at an interest rate of 18% per annum. Then we've got the car loan across the 7-year car loan term. You're looking at a minimum repayment of $254 per month at 8.49% as the interest rate. So the snowball method here, we have covered this in a previous webinar as well. Check it out on the YouTube channel. Involves making the minimum repayments across all of your loans and then paying down the loans with the smallest balance first. And as they get paid down, you transfer those payments you're making towards that small loan to the next smallest loan. You pay that one down and then you divert all of the money you're paying against that into the next biggest loan. And you roll up until you're eventually debt-free. So what this means in this case is I would suggest that they look at paying off $1,000 extra per month off each credit card. Now, that means they are compromising or hitting savings rate for the first period of time, but it's more important they're clearing that credit card. Firstly, the interest rate is higher, so that's significant. Secondly, there's a psychological weight that comes with having this kind of debt in place. And it can sit on you and it can make you feel like you're not making any real progress. I prefer to see in this kind of scenario having a dedicated, narrow focus on achieving the goal. So to do that, let's get rid of the distractions first. So let's free up of that savings amount per month, $1,000 per extra per month. So big commitment, $2,000 per month off each credit card. Now, I acknowledge that their savings rate in the scenario is about $16,000, so they need to find an extra $8,000 to do this. They can do that, I think, with the budget they've got. We've also got some other contingencies that we'll explore, but in the meantime, $1,000 extra per month off each credit card. Once that's done, you take that $1,000 per month each, roll it together with the minimum repayments they were paying on the credit card, and use that to knock down Hermia's car loan. Once that's eliminated, then we can divert that $2,314 back into the savings account. So by doing this, we're prioritizing that debt elimination first. And the reason I'm comfortable with this in particular, they have $30,000 put aside. So they have a buffer behind them just in case anything should happen. So based on that and that fairly aggressive repayment schedule, the credit card should be cleared within 6 months. Now, if they chose to instead pay $1,000 off one credit card and then, go subsequential, rather than concurrent, that'll drag it out by another 6 months. It doesn't have a material impact in the end, but I would recommend that they go pretty hard at it at clearing the credit card. After that, clearing the credit card, moving on to the car loan, that'll then be cleared within about 9 months. Now, that's 9 months from today, so it's not 9 months from the end of the credit cards. So ideally, within a 10-month period there, their credit cards and their car loan should be cleared by making fairly aggressive repayments. So there's no impact I should point out here on their savings goal. We've looked at it. It adds about a month to how long it'll take to save their deposit. So there's no material impact there. But what it does do is it immediately boosts their borrowing capacity. Any broker will tell you that having credit card debt or personal debt does reduce how much the bank will lend you. It also gives you back full control over your cash flow. And also there's a really strong boost on the emotional satisfaction side as well. And that shouldn't be downplayed. So layer number 3 that we're looking at. So we've done the ratios, we've reviewed living expenses, we've worked on the snowball. Bringing together the third step of our fundamentals of finance is the buckets. And in this case, we're going to take a slightly different approach. You may recall from the webinar we've already done on the buckets, again, available on the YouTube channel, that the idea is that you apportion money across 3 main areas, essentially short, medium, and long term, and each of them has their own risk characteristics and their own accessibility characteristics. So short-term money you'll need in the next 12 months, very, very accessible. Interest rate is probably less important than being able to access it as needed. Medium term is more putting aside a year to 3 years of living expenses, putting it in something that will generate a higher return over time, isn't immediately accessible. So you're thinking things like fixed interest or bonds. And finally, the third bucket is your long-term growth and wealth bucket. That's where things will sit there. You don't really want to be touching them at any stage over the next 5 years and just let them accumulate. Because Lysa and Hermia are saving for a shorter term goal, though, and because they've got superannuation going in, my recommendation would be that we stick to 2 buckets for now and just know that the superannuation bucket is filling bucket number 3. So switching to 2 buckets for now looks like bucket 1, aim for 3 months of expenses. So just immediately save up the money there. Now, at the moment, they have that already. They're spending $6,500 per month. That's $19,500 to cover 3 months. They've already got that. So you could argue that the $30,000 they've got, that's bucket 1 done. They should be moving $10,500 across to bucket 2. This is the home deposit account, and this is where all of their extra money will go. So this will be high interest. It will be not as accessible as it is under bucket 1. And it's something that we've used quite a lot is rolling term deposits. So often 2 term deposits, a 6-month one and a 12-month one, and you just roll them over every 6 months. Works quite well when interest rates are on the rise. As I was working through this, I did have a quick question, and pardon me while I have a cheeky drink. They have $30,000 of savings, but they have $18,000 of debt. So should they clear their debt using their savings? Now, I think the mathematical answer, the traditional financial planning answer would be yes, but I have a different take. My answer would be no. They shouldn't use that money to clear that debt for a few reasons. Number one, based on our numbers, based on their cash flow, based on their capacity to make repayments, they should have all of those loans gone within the next 12 months. If they're dedicated and committed to it, those loans will be gone within 12 months. So why compromise your savings that you've achieved by doing something, by repaying something that you should be able to take care of in the next 12 months? Number two, having that savings buffer there allows for a lot of flexibility if things should happen or if they have unexpected expenses arise. As I say, it's only slightly more than 5 months worth of their expenses. So I would rather, if they had 12 months worth, then I would be saying, well, yeah, it's probably worth repaying that debt. But just for me being excessively cautious and allowing for greater control, I would be looking at not using that money yet. Now, the counter argument to that is that they will be paying more interest against the loans that they haven't repaid yet. So it's something to be aware of. My desire to say not to do it is mainly around the psychological benefits of having that buffer behind you and allowing for future risks. If you're looking for a purely mathematical or arithmetic basis, this would not be the best way to go. Now, they've got their lasagna together. They're working on the 3 layers. The ratios are getting pruned. They're working on finding living expenses. They're working on bringing them down. They've got their snowball rolling. They're making the payments against the credit card. They're seeing the progress each month as that balance comes down. They have their personal, their buckets in place. Blanked out there for a second. Their buckets are in place. They're filling them up. They're filling up bucket 2, and they've got it in the right place and understand the role that it's going to play in their position. Now, while they're doing that, if we get down the savings track to 3.5 years, what can they do in the meantime to at least be improving their overall financial position? Because, we have a very focused view on how do we save the deposit, but our financial position is actually a lot broader. It covers a whole range of different areas. So the 3 big things that I would recommend people tackle while they're working on saving their deposit are things that are fairly low cost, shouldn't actually cost you a great deal, really, but could have a big benefit for you in the long run. Number 1 is superannuation. Contact your super fund, have it reviewed, speak to one of their advisors or speak to us here at Advice Gallery, and we can provide advice for you around what your superannuation looks like and what it should be doing. From my perspective, there's a few priorities. We want it to be low cost. We want the risk of the investment profile within the portfolio to align with your own personal risk profile. We had somebody the other day whose investments are incredibly high risk. So they're 95% growth, shares and international shares, 5% defensive, but they told me and scores came out that they were very, very, very risk averse. So almost the exact opposite of the way it's invested. There's nothing wrong with either of those options. Where we have a problem is when they're not aligned. So make sure that your super portfolio is aligned with your risk profile. It should have good insurance. Now, the insurance quality within super funds, to be honest, has deteriorated in the last couple of years, but you should still be able to get at least some good life insurance and possibly some reasonable TP insurance. But again, this needs to be part of a broader financial review. The one here, and again, this is another item that I've excluded from analysis, but it's ask your super fund about the First Home Super Saver Scheme, Boston S. This is a scheme. It's far more complicated than it needed to be, and I would argue it doesn't achieve as much as they think it will. But it's a scheme whereby you can make pre and post-tax contributions to your super fund outside of your work and employer contribution, and then keep it in there, not paid as much tax on the earnings in there. It's earning at a fixed rate, so it's the 90-day bank bill rate plus 3%. And then when you find a house, you can pull that money out of super, you get a tax rebate. Yeah, depending on your tax rate, depending on your income, you may end up paying a good deal less tax, but it can be hard to make work. So speak to your super fund. I think they all offer the First Home Super Saver Scheme, and it can sort of boost that deposit by a few $1,000s a year if you're saving really aggressively. Now, for Lysa and Hermia, when it's all settled, they should be saving about $24,000 to $30,000 a year. So it might work out well for them. So let's have a chat with your super fund about the First Home Super Saver Scheme. They should have their insurance reviewed. Income protection is probably, to my mind, the biggest priority at this stage of people's lives. There are 4 types of insurance, which we're about to cover in our next webinar. Life insurance, total permanent disability insurance, income protection, and trauma insurance. Normally, I would like to see people take a little bit of all of them rather than pick one or the other. But I know that for people working towards buying a house, income protection is really important because if your income were to stop, how does that happen? What does that mean for you and your family and your financial position? So part of that is having a priorities discussion and working out what areas you want to cover. This is where a financial advisor is really helpful. They will help facilitate that conversation for you. They'll also help you work out the ownership ideas. So how should it be structured for where the policy should be owned? Because ultimately that's where the money will be directed. But the biggest and final point I would say is get advice. Now, you may have heard of me talk before. We are an independent financial planning firm that has a very special definition under Section 293A of the Corporations Act. Essentially, we don't take commissions. That means that we charge for our advice around insurance, quite proudly, no issue around that. But where that can maybe compromise the value of our advice is for people like Lysa and Hermia. If you're 27 or 28, your income protection policy is probably going to cost you maybe $1,000. It's tax deductible. It can be set up in a fairly cost-effective way. Our fees around preparing insurance advice exceed $3,000 per person. So to pay me $3,000 to get a policy of $1,000 with a discount because there's no commission on it isn't really worth it. In that case, we recommend you speak to your super fund or we speak to one of the very many very good risk-only advisors that are in the market. If you are curious about it, I can pass on some names. Happy to recommend people because it is a really, really critical part of people's life. And the earlier you get it, the cheaper it is. The third and final one that I want to cover off is I struggled with putting this one in because I got in a bit of an argument with somebody once because their solution to people's budgetary problems was just grow your income. And I completely acknowledge there are many, many, many people out there that can't do that. They don't have control over that. They don't have control over their time. They are just working to make ends meet. So it feels like a very glib thing to say. But if you're like Lysa and Hermia and you do have the option of having a little bit more help at home and not having to work all the time, think about ways that you can grow your income. There's a few different ways. Long focus on your career. Now, this isn't to say you should be in your career for life, but the perspective, if you're in your career, then why not make the most of it? So, do the extra work, take on the extra responsibilities, make sure you're not advantage of, really focus on building that career. I'd also look to negotiate and pursue salary increases. And this is quite a difficult thing. There's an art to it, but chase a higher income as you go along. From my perspective, and I'm not a career coach, but I don't see anything wrong with changing employers regularly if you're adding $5,000-$10,000 to your salary each time. Because in Lisa's case, that could take her from $65,000 to $80,000 within 18 months or 2 years. That'll have a material impact on their ability to save money. You might look at getting an extra $10,000 a year in savings by doing that. So, know your worth, pursue your worth, and make sure you have those negotiations. Then you've got the side hustles, and this is kind of a hot topic, I know. Bear with me, I'm just going to clear my throat. Because everybody online and everybody always says, oh, just pick up a side hustle. And there are side hustles out there that will make money. There are side hustles that can work very well. In my experience, though, they seem to me like an expensive and often unnecessary distraction. You know, Lysa and Hermia, they're on track. They will have their deposits saved within 3 years. Going and getting a side hustle, maybe that'll shave a year off it. Cool. But often side hustles do require a commitment of either time or energy or money. So if you're going to do that, I'm conscious that people working 60 or 70 hours a week to meet these side hustles, if there's no money in it, they're not getting ahead. They're investing a lot of time and energy and often money, but they may not be getting ahead. So be very skeptical, very critical, very intentional around the side hustles that you decide to pursue. Some of them can work. I've known people that, drive Ubers for a few hours at night and they've contributed that money towards their deposit. It's not a bad thing, but it can be a very big commitment. Thank you very much. We have flown through that. There was a bit less to cover this time because we were wrapping up things we've already talked about a fair bit. If you do have any questions, please reach out. But firstly, we have some upcoming webinars. We've got Life Insurance Basics coming up on Tuesday, the 23rd of April, so a fortnight from today, where we will talk about those 4 different types of insurance, what they are, what they provide for, when they pay, and sometimes even how they're taxed. On Thursday, 9th of May, we'll also spend some time working out how much insurance you need. Each person's insurance needs are unique, to the point where my wife and I have different needs for insurance because we have different assets thanks to our super fund. We may want the exact same things, but because our superannuation balances are different, our final insurance balance is also different. So it's worth sitting down, and we'll work through an active worksheet to show you how to work out the kind of insurance you need to be having. So you can register for these over at theadvicegallery.com.au. The webinars page has all the details. Also, at the bottom of that are links to the recordings for the webinars we've had already. If you have any questions, give me a call, 0431 664 422, or send an email to hello@theadvicegallery.com.au. Stop sharing. I think we only have 1 or 2 people on the call. So if there are any questions, just reach out. Otherwise, I'll wrap up. We're wrapping up and we will get back to our day. I hope you have a good day. I hope there was some value in this. And as always, if you have any questions, just get in touch. Thanks a lot.